This is my new max spec 5090 PC, and I was forced to build it at the worst possible time. I've been an Apple laptop user for about 20 years now, and I've put up with a lot of things: butterfly keyboards, overheating GPUs, the list goes on. I was pretty happy with the M series laptops, but for me at least, over 2 laptops, I've had 3 screens break, and it's not as if I'm abusing them. So at this point, I'm not putting any more money into them, and I'm going to build a desktop PC. Unfortunately, I've picked the absolute worst time to do that. I thought it would make the project even more interesting, so I thought I'd document it. My priorities are video editing in DaVinci Resolve, which is pretty heavy on graphics, some 3D work, and it wouldn't hurt to be able to play the latest games. So what I want is a high RAM system with lots of storage and a really powerful GPU. Unfortunately, at the moment, all 3 of these components are in high demand for AI data centers, so the prices have increased dramatically. I haven't built a PC in about 5 years, but normally when I do, I just buy all the components, a case, and then build it. Simple. This time, I'm going to approach it a little differently. I'm going to see if I can get RAM, storage, and a graphics card for a reasonable price before I commit to the build. Because if I can't get them at a reasonable price, I might have to scrap the whole idea before it even begins. The DDR5 shortage started affecting prices in the last few months of 2025. So if you were paying attention, you could get in before things got crazy. Unfortunately, I wasn't paying attention. So by the time I was looking, it was well over £600 for 64 gigabytes of DDR5. And we can forget paying that. So I turned to eBay. I thought I had quite a good idea of saving my search so that eBay would email me when their new listings came up and hopefully I could get a good deal. But eBay does this so slowly that by the time you get emails, all the good listings have gone. So instead, I turned to a not very advanced method of just spamming refresh and hoping that something good would come up. And it worked. After a few days, up popped a reasonably priced 64GB set of Corsair Vengeance DDR5. I just had to hope that they worked. I was a bit worried that I would get scammed because they were way below market rate, but when they turned up, everything looked legit. The only problem is I want to use an AMD CPU, and I thought I was buying an AMD Expo kit, and the one that turned up said Intel XMP. This isn't ideal, but it should be fine as most modern motherboards can read XMP profiles as well as Expo. Storage was a bit easier, but still eBay. Even though NVMe pricing has gone crazy, I noticed that 1 and 2 terabyte drives were hit the hardest. If you go for 4 terabyte drives instead, they're actually a much better value. So using the same spamming refresh technique, it wasn't long before I found 2 4 terabyte drives, one Samsung 990 Pro and one Western Digital SN850X. 2 high-end drives for about £65 per terabyte, which I call a good result. Now for the hardest part. The graphics card. I wanted a 50 series card because NVIDIA added hardware encoders and decoders, which is really important for timeline playback. With graphics cards, you can either get a Founders Edition card straight from NVIDIA, or you can get a partner card from various different brands. But because of memory shortages, the partner cards have increased quite dramatically in price. So far, NVIDIA hasn't increased the price of the Founders Edition cards. I prefer the look of them. They are smaller, so they'll fit in more cases, and they're cheaper. Perfect, so I'll just get one of them. The only problem is they're absolutely impossible to get hold of. The used market is absolutely full of scalpers who want way above MSRP, so that's not really an option. And I wanted a card with a retail warranty. There may be 1 or 2 drops per region per month, and people are ready for it. They always sell out within minutes. So here my advanced tactic of hitting refresh over and over isn't going to work if I'm trying to aim at a 5-minute window once or twice a month. Even as someone who finds refreshing storefronts quite appealing, this is not going to work. So I found 2 methods to try and get hold of one. The first is Notify FE, which is an API checker that basically just refreshes every 10 seconds and then opens up a purchase link when a drop happens. This is perfect if you work at a desk all day, but if you don't, there's a good chance you'll miss it. The second method is the Core Finder Discord group. This is essentially the same thing as Notify FE, but the difference is that you can get notifications to your phone. So I set up both of these and I wasn't really confident that it would work. But a week later, and the only issue was I noticed 3 minutes after it had dropped, just 3 minutes, and I was already thousands deep in a queue. I thought, no chance. And I was shocked that the queue counted down and I got to the checkout page. I thought, great, this is excellent. But then when I filled out my details and clicked order, something went wrong. I checked the Discord groups, the API checker, stock gone, no chance, it's over. But true to form, I just kept refreshing that hit order button thinking it's not going to work. But then 20 to 30 minutes later, bam, order complete. The order was dispatched the next day and my GPU came a few days later. So now I have all the three key components, RAM, storage, and GPU at the best price possible in this insane market. So I think I've got the green light to go ahead with the build. When it comes to cases, you can have three main options. A mid-tower, which is kind of the standard option and is the most flexible. But in my opinion, they're just unnecessarily big and bulky and just don't really appeal to me. Then there's the other end of the spectrum, ITX builds, which are really small form factor builds. These really do appeal to me in the same way a Mac Studio does. There's just something cool about cramming as much power as possible into a tiny form factor. But for this build, the whole point is to make a productive workstation machine that I can repair and upgrade and doesn't give me any headaches. So doing an ITX build doesn't really make sense. So for me, medium form factor is a sweet spot. Not too big and bulky, but not so small that I have to make lots of compromises. With a medium form factor, there's room for all the power-hungry modern components, but there's also enough room to cool them effectively, which should mean that the system runs relatively quiet as well. Part of the reason I kept buying Apple products is honestly because I just think they look and feel really good, and I kind of wanted the same thing for my PC case. Sadly, there isn't many options. Initially, I ordered the N-Case M3, but then I realized there was no front I/O, which on a desktop I just think is ridiculous. So I cancelled the order. They do have a side I/O kit, but as far as I can see, it doesn't actually exist because it's never in stock. I looked for around a week before I could find any case that really appealed to me and was something that I was excited to build in. But eventually I came across the McPro Apollo S Ultra, which seemed perfect. Medium form factor, fully aluminium, great airflow, modern front I/O. And obviously the design is inspired by the 2019 Mac Pro, which I think is one of the best designs in tech for the past 20 years or so. So this case was a no-brainer. Deciding on a motherboard was probably the most tedious part of the whole project. I knew that I wanted an AMD CPU, so that narrowed down options quite a bit, but there's still a million different options, different chipsets, different I/O. The more you look into it, the more confusing it gets. And then you start to realize that if you don't buy the correct board, then your NVMe storage will start to steal PCIe bandwidth from your graphics card, which is not ideal. I've just spent all day looking at motherboard spreadsheets and cooling options and making sure everything will fit in my case, and I'm starting to wonder if I maybe should have just bought a Mac Studio, because then all you have to do is just turn it on. Never mind. Anyway, I got over my mini crisis and decided on the Gigabyte X870M. Modern chipset, 2 NVMe that don't steal PCI from your GPU, thankfully, 2 high-speed USB 4 ports, and a second PCIe slot so that I can use 10 gigabit Ethernet if I want to add that in future. Fine. This one was a fairly easy choice. AMD have been dominating lately, so I knew I'd be going with an AMD CPU. Until recently, you had to decide between two types of CPU, a productivity one with high cores and threads, or a gaming one with 3D V-cache. Even though this is more of a workstation desktop, I don't want that compromise, and luckily I don't have to, because AMD released the 9950 X3D. This chip is the best of both worlds. It has 16 cores and 32 threads, but 8 of them have 3D V-cache and the other 8 don't. So for when you're doing productivity tasks like rendering, encoding, decoding, etc., all 16 cores are used. But when you're gaming, only 8 of the cores are used, and those are the ones that have 3D V-cache. So you get gaming performance and productivity performance. Perfect. The only downside is that it runs pretty hot, so it needs a decent amount of cooling. I went with a 360mm AIO, the Cooler Master Atmos Stealth 360, partly because I'm hoping for lower temperatures and noise levels, but also since my RAM is so high that I can't use the best air coolers because they won't fit in my case. For the power supply, I went with the Corsair SF1000. I can't believe how small this thing is at 1000 watts. I got it on sale for a really good price, and the fan doesn't run until it's under high load. It's really cool that you can get so much power in such a tiny power supply.
I went with a standard layout with two 140mm Noctua intake fans at the front and a 120mm exhaust fan at the back. I had heard that the Mac Pro cases were difficult to build in, but honestly, it wasn't that bad. Although it came with no instructions whatsoever, they include all the screws and mounting hardware that you would need in the box. After having done some small form factor builds in the past, I was really pleased that I picked a slightly larger case for this build. It's as simple as just putting your CPU, RAM and storage in your motherboard, and then just putting the motherboard in and screwing it in place. Or at least that's what I thought, because then I realised with all my components already in place, it's basically impossible to get the top off the case or even remove the radiator bracket, so I had to take everything out and start again. Even with all the components removed, getting the 360mm AIO and the bracket back in the case and screwing it in with the front fans installed took a bit of perseverance and patience, but I managed to make it work. Next, I just had to reinstall the motherboard, put the PSU back in and wire everything up. All that was left was the mounting hardware for the CPU, applying thermal paste, and then installing the AIO pump. After that, all I had to do was install the GPU and make absolutely sure that it was connected properly. And the build was finished.
So we got there, the build is finally done. The next question is, will it boot? After what felt like an uncomfortably long time, success, it booted into the BIOS, great. The next step was to see if my RAM ran successfully at 6000 megatransfers despite not having the AMD Expo profile, but as I'd hoped, the motherboard recognized the XMP profiles, so I just set them and rebooted, and then the RAM ran at the advertised speeds of 6000 megatransfers. The next step was to install Windows and all the appropriate drivers, which is a bit tedious but fairly straightforward. Next was the fun part. How does the system perform? I'm really pleased with how this new PC performs. My main use is video editing in DaVinci Resolve, and I use highly compressed footage from the Sony FX3, and timeline playback is amazing. But you'd probably expect that with these components. The M series MacBook Pros, when they were working, were already really good at video editing, but what they lacked is graphical performance. I noticed that with denoising and GPU intensive effects, the MacBook Pros would struggle, and that's what sets this PC apart. With things like denoising, I can get full timeline playback, which really makes a massive difference to how enjoyable video editing is. One area where the PC does not compete with the MacBook Pros is power and heat output. I live in quite a cold climate in Scotland, but I noticed that with my new PC, my office is the hottest room in my house by far. And that brings me on to one of my initial disappointments with the build, the noise. When I first set up the PC, it was really loud. For whatever reason, the default fan curves for the AIO were pretty aggressive, so I just changed them slightly, and now at idle, everything is pretty quiet. I've set the curves to only kick in when the CPU temperatures get over 65 degrees. It's nowhere near as quiet as say a Mac Studio or MacBook Pro, but at idle, you can't really hear it. So was it worth it to build a PC during all these component shortages and price rises? Definitely. But it was really time consuming and a lot more effort than I expected. Of course, the performance is insane, but that wasn't really what this was about for me. This was about component choice, upgradability, and repairability. The main benefit for me is if I need to upgrade or if I need to repair something, I can just change things out as I see fit and I don't need to buy a whole new machine. So yeah, I'm really excited to get good use out of this PC, and honestly, I wish I'd done it earlier.